So I have a few slightly random thoughts that I want to share, especially on this last day. It's interesting timing that I think we've strung together. We'll see. But first of all, I'm sure this has been said many times in the course, but throughout the course, but to reiterate that how precious just the aspiration to ordain is. That spark, that wish in somebody's heart, wherever it goes in this life, is something to just be treasured and cherished and to be nurtured, whether it manifests in ordination here and now or whether it's something that goes with you into the future. But not to ever discount just the preciousness of that very wish and aspiration. And so, in that light, Yangchen Rinpoche, probably we've mentioned this before, was here recently, and he had a private session with the Sangha, and someone asked the question, does it make sense really to ordain in this modern age, in this contemporary times? That's a big argument you hear among lay Buddhists in particular in the West. And as I recall Rinpoche's answer, what he said was, if you're thinking of just this life, then it actually doesn't make much sense. There's lots of wonderful things you can do, things you can see, things you can experience, so maybe it doesn't make much sense. But he said, if you're thinking of future lives, then it makes sense. And he may have said, or I may have further elaborated on it, but my thought was, it's the only thing that makes sense if you are thinking of future lives. And why is that? I mean, Geshe-la in our debate class Monday, I think, was reminding us again, how did we get here? How did we get our human bodies? How did we, in this room, and people probably watching this too, get our precious human life, our opportunity to meet the Dharma? It's not because we spent our last life eating a lot of ice cream or skateboarding or whatever. We might have done that too. But it is the merit that is generated, and tremendous amount of merit is needed both to be human and even more to have a precious human life. So that we have one, that we have it right now, if we're looking for the long term, well, we really want to make the causes to do it again and again and again and again and again. So that's just something to hold in our mind as we think about this aspiration. Interestingly, the Korean monk who visited the other day is out looking at how the Dharma is in America today. And he mentioned that he'd been to a lot of lay centers, very few monastic centers. As we know, there aren't very many. And what he was noticing is that Dharma in America seems to have a lot to do with people wanting to have more peaceful mind themselves, have a happier life now, have better relationships now. He said, I don't hear many people talking about enlightenment. I don't hear many people talking about liberation and awakening. And I think in general, our Dharma practices may be in that vein. You know, our human life is right here in front of us, the experiences we have today. We may notice that we're angry, we want to work on our anger, and those are really positive and virtuous things. But if we have that long-term goal, that it's not just to make this a better life, but that we're actually going to eliminate the suffering of ourselves, and with bodhicitta, we intend to eliminate the suffering of every living being, and we have to become Buddha in order to do that. Only the Buddha can guide us out of that. Then with that kind of motivation, again, our Dharma practice is very alive. And we have a really good reason to think about, oh, I might devote my life to doing this full time. Maybe that's a good idea. So it's in that framework to keep holding that aspiration. We just need to keep checking our motivation for the long haul. Now, it also takes a tremendous amount of conditions to come together for everything to happen to live a monastic life. A lot of merit, a lot of conditions. And sometimes they come together and sometimes they don't. That's also just a fact of our karma ripening or whatever. But again, if that aspiration is still in our hearts, then we feed it in whatever way we can, whatever way is possible throughout this life. And so holding it really pure and clear is like the, oh, if I'm not a monk in this life, okay, but maybe next, maybe next, maybe next. We have lots of lay friends actually who come to the Abbey who are dead set on ordaining in their next life. It's inspiring to hear them speak. So there's that piece that I just wanted to bring to our awareness. Another thing that came up for me as I was thinking about EML, Venerable Tian Chang was one of the Taiwanese nuns who very much supported the Abbey in the early days. She had a big influence on me becoming a nun, actually. And she was part of my ordination, Venerable Jigme's ordination, several people here. And when I went to Taiwan with Venerable Jigme, we stopped at Venerable Tian Chang's temple. She was our host before we went. I don't remember what advice she was giving me now. She gave me some advice. And in her comment, she said, "You are still young in the practice." Well, I had already been Venerable Children's student 12 years before I ordained. And by the time I was in Taiwan, I had been ordained for 3 years. Young in the practice? I didn't say anything to her. Well, okay, here we are. I've been at the Abbey 17 years. I finally know I am very young in the practice. Very, very young in the practice. In the monastic practice, also in Dharma practice. But part of what I also want to say to all of us here is that we have some idea, I think, that we'll get somewhere. We'll arrive someplace. And the longer I'm ordained, the more I know there is no some place to get to as a monastic. It is a lived practice. It is an embodied practice. And it is only by doing it and doing it and doing it and living it that we mature in the practice. So it doesn't matter how much we study. I mean, that's another thing. Our Dharma education is very important. But that doesn't make us mature in our monastic practice per se. I suspect living in community may, quote, accelerate that maturation. I can't prove that, but that's a possibility. Also, living with a teacher who's willing to guide students may accelerate that maturation. But then to what? You just keep living as a monastic until you die. That's the practice. And the maturation shows. We can see it in our two seniors here who have been ordained almost 50 and almost 50 years respectively. That is the sign of a mature practice. And they've done amazing things in the Dharma. But their maturation of their ordained life has been in living the worldview, embodying the Buddhist worldview. And that's where this wonderful phrase of making the familiar unfamiliar and the unfamiliar familiar, we have so much to undo, to unlearn. And you can't sit down and take a test on that. You just have to live it and change our habits day by day by day. So the richness, the reward, if you will, of living in monastic life is to continue to mature, simply together, to see, oh, look how we are growing, look how I am growing, look how the community is growing in the Dharma, not because we're better, but because we can see that we are becoming more and more familiar with the Buddhist world mind, Buddhist worldview mind, and less familiar with the pretty sad and distorted values that we were probably raised in. And another thing that Yangchen Rinpoche said when somebody asked him, how have you been able to stay ordained, given the fact that we've seen many times that sometimes Tibetan monks in particular, they were addressing, come to the West and get kind of dazzled by the stuff we have. And he said, well, I haven't strayed very far from the monastic community. That's how I've stayed ordained. We haven't strayed very far. We haven't gone out. We haven't tested our wings. We haven't tried to be the skateboarding monk of all times. Or, we've kept it. He said, I have kept it within the Dharma. And I think that's an important teaching for us when we think about exploring monastic life. That's our framework right now, to remember that that's how we preserve our robes, because it's easy to take ordination. That is not actually true. It takes a lot of things to get there. But then once that ordination happens, we take it, we change our clothes, we get our haircut, and then what? then it's a whole other thing. And staying close to the Dharma, staying close to the community is a way to be able to preserve that for our whole life. So finally, I had an interesting experience in the last couple of weeks. As you know, I was with my sister as she passed away, and I was there to be with the family, and we put together the funeral, as it more like it was a sharing. And I did the photo collection of the video of her life, and I was just able to see, my sister was she was so sweet. She loved everybody. She was the kind of person that made friends with everybody, and everybody loved her. Really, when she worked collections at the bank, she was so successful because she was just so empathetic with the people who couldn't pay their bills. She would work out something with them, and they just loved being heard or something. I don't know. She's very successful at it. She had a very kind of ordinary life. Family, community, work, children, grandchildren. People loved her. And I looked at that photograph and I thought, and so this is a life. This is a life, I see. 8 minutes of photos, lots of close-up photos. She was really into, making photos. And the next night, 2 nights later, I watched the whole 2 hours of Venerable Heng Cheng's memorial. And I just saw the difference in a life that had been devoted to a life in the Dharma. And the clear tribute to a life of virtue, thinking of all that she had done, not because she had set goals, and yes, she did amazing things, but it was her life as a lived experience that was being celebrated in that ceremony. And this is not in any way to diss my sister, who I love and admire, and it is no way to kind of elevate Venerable Heng Cheng higher than she would want us to. It is simply, in this context of exploring monastic life, looking at the end of my life, what do I want to look back and say, this is how I lived it. This is the virtue I created in this way. And those are the things we have to think about. Those are the decisions we can make now. It doesn't matter if we're 15 or we're 85. We can make that decision from this moment forward. But it was a stark contrast for me, and I felt, personally, I really rejoiced to have had the opportunity. I will never be able to thank you enough for the opportunity to be able to live that kind of life. I started late. I hope I live to be 85 because I want 30 years of ordained life. That's what But it's okay, because from the moment that switch happens, we live it. And when we live it, we grow. And when we grow, we are making that plans for the future lives, as Yangten Rinpoche pointed out for us. And so if we have that opportunity, rejoice. If we don't have that opportunity, then support the Sangha and create the causes to do it the next time. It's not right for everybody. I'm not doing a hard sell. But I do want to say at the end of this program, think about it. Think about it a lot.